It was June of 1980. Donna and I were walking around in London, and suddenly we heard loud shouts, angry shouts, we thought, and we were swept into a parade. It was a protest. The Labour Party was already tired of Margaret Thatcher, and she had another decade to go. They were shouting, "Maggie, Maggie, Maggie, no, 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 Maggie, 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 go, go, go." John, the gospel writer, has us joining a crowd that is angry because they've been ruled by Romans for almost a century. They too are shouting words. John puts us with that crowd in Jerusalem, unlike the synoptic gospels that have us riding in with Jesus. The crowd has experienced another parade earlier that day. Pilate has come from the west coast and marched into Jerusalem for Passover. Now, when Pilate comes in, he's coming in with armed troops. They're riding horses, there's cavalry, there are infantry, and these troops are primed to do the worst. Everything about them shouts power. The horses, the red leather that they're wearing, which has been freshly oiled so that it creaks as they march along, the drummers, the bright helmets, the eagles on top of the standards, the swords, all glitters in the sun. The dust reminds the people that this is what will happen to them if they step out. Why this day do they have to come to town? Because it's Passover. Passover is Independence Day, 4th of July, Ramadan, homecoming, all rolled up into one. Marching in the crowd are some zealots. They know what time it is also. The zealots are freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your politics. They too are in the crowd inciting the shouts, "Hosanna, save now, save now, save now." They're looking for Elijah to return. Jesus has cited Elijah in the past, and they're looking for this prophet of fire. He can call it down from heaven, not only to consume a sacrifice, but he's wiped out 102 of the imperial army with poofs of fire. They want an Elijah who's going to come and slit the throats of the 450 false prophets that have marched in with Pilate. And the zealots are ready to slash throats. They're marching out, shouting Psalm 118, waving those branches like they waved when Simon of Maccabees came back into town about 100 years earlier. Waving palm branches, the crowds greeted him and shouted, "Hosanna, save now." And he did. Pushed the Romans and the Syrians out of the city, and he ruled as a Jewish ruler for decades. Jesus is walking into town, and he sees this crowd coming after him, coming out to him, and he knows that he can't make his voice heard. There will be no sermon from Jesus this day. Instead, there's an acted parable. Jesus, the story says in John, looks around and finds a young donkey, an unridden donkey, an untrained donkey. And he gets on and is able to ride this animal. untrained is part of the parable that the disciples only figure out much later after they've seen Jesus glorified on the cross. A young donkey, one never ridden, just like this way of kingdom peace has never been tried before. Though it's been preached by the prophets, Zechariah 9, your king comes gently on a peace animal, not a weapon of war. Jesus acted with courage to choose the way of peace, because the way of peace always invites dissension and hostility. Jesus wisely chose a voiceless parable. Something I'm still trying to do. Whenever I bring the peace discussion to my classes, it disrupts the conversation. There's always somebody who realizes that this conscientious objection stuff is not really going to work in our world. It takes courage to stand for peace. It takes courage to do the right thing when you're a high school student, and there's so many ways that you can be distracted by other stuff. It takes courage to stay with it and to complete your assignments well. It takes courage to face overwhelming family distress and loss, to keep moving with perseverance. It takes courage to choose that way of peace. It takes courage to be a congregation that says we will be welcoming, even if it costs us our relationships and our alignments, and it might cost us our building. It takes courage to choose the way of peace. It takes courage if you're Bishop Oscar Romero. Just 3 months before we found the angry labor rights, Oscar Romero on this day in 1980 was assassinated because he chose the way of peace and offered that last mass to a group of all the people, the powerful and the weak, all in one open air mass ceremony. It takes courage to be an 18-year-old kid named Hofer living in the Rockport colony in South Dakota in World War I. When you're drafted, you go to Washington, you refuse to wear the uniform, you refuse to obey the orders, and you're taken to Alcatraz to be tortured by the American Army. After the war ends, you're taken to Fort Leavenworth, and within a week, you're dead. Military reports it as the flu. It may take a little courage to come with my Murder and Mayhem class on Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock when we're going to make a visit to the exhibit that talks about the Hofers and about other conscientious objection that happened during World War I. There's a great exhibit there, Voices of Conscience or something like that. It's right next to Kevin's office. That's why I'm looking at him. When it was displayed at Kaufman Museum in North Newton, Kansas, you had to pay $7 to get in, but Kevin will let you in free if you come anytime in the next 31 days, because it leaves Fresno again on the 24th of April. If you need a little help getting there, join our class. We're going to meet early at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning to be a part of that exhibit. It takes courage to choose the way of peace. when others are calling for war. It takes peace to give it takes courage to give a peace witness. Because everything about our world says the only way to help those who are oppressed is to arm ourselves with more violence. Jesus invites us to this way of peace. May we have the courage to walk in the light of Jesus, to walk peacefully, faithfully, hopefully. Jesus knew that he had to choose this way with courage because he knew that within a week it would cost him the glorification of being lifted up. And as he said very shortly after this, look, unless a grain of seed falls into the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, if it's glorified, it will produce great fruit. May we experience that fruit.